comments from the floor. Please say who you are and which organisation you'll work for, if you're a student or whatever. Please, over to you. Sabia?
Yeah, hi, Samir Houari from the Humanitarian Policy Group here at ODI. I just have a question for Claire and around this issue about whether leadership's any different in other sectors than it is for the humanitarian sector. And I guess many in the humanitarian community have shown some concerns in some contexts when there's been a triple-hatted or double-hatted humanitarian leader, saying that maybe some of the skills or experience for the HC role is not in place with some of the others coming from a background of the SRSG or from the ERC. So I was just wondering, how would you explain that if, you know, I guess the skill set is actually quite similar across the board?
I'll tell you what, we'll take a few questions and then we'll go to the panel. Wendy, please. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Wendy Fenton, the coordinator of the Humanitarian Practice Network at ODI. I'm interested, partly because I looked at it myself a few years ago, the joint initiative in Zimbabwe, and how that sort of highlights the links between risk and innovation. And I know that one of the agencies involved in that and who took a lead in terms of moving that initiative along, actually the organization had developed a prize for innovation. And in fact, the team won the prize for the role they played in moving that forward. And I just wondered if some of the panel would like to comment on how they see the relationship between risk and innovation in terms of leadership. Thanks.
David, over in the corner.
David Sanderson from Stand Up at Oxford Brookes. Thank you very much for a very interesting series of presentations. Clara, I wanted to pick up on your point about leadership being from not necessarily just humanitarian. There are different views. And I just wanted to ask wider the issue of people from other sectors coming into our sector and whether that's a good or a bad thing.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm on the Humanitarian Leadership Development Programme, CBHA funded. I have a question that kind of is related to methodology and kind of picks up on Claire's point and a couple of the other comments. If we've kind of presupposed that humanitarian leadership is different to normal leadership, perhaps a better focus of the study would have been to take some of the 2,000 books and summarise the hypotheses from those and test them against the context of a case study of a humanitarian, and then the anomalies could either be just attributed to the context or maybe that would highlight specific differences. I'm still deciding myself what I believe, but that might have been another way to do it.
For the joys of hindsight. Okay, thank you. The gentleman in the corner.
Hello, my name isn't on your list, unfortunately, but I'm Charles Clayton. Worked in NGOs for many years and now run Oxford Leaders, and we coach and mentor leaders in humanitarian organizations. This idea of space for leaders that you mentioned, Margie, very intriguing idea, the need for space for leaders. And I connect that with the idea that of bureaucratizing, big organizations especially become very bureaucratized and risk averse, in other words, very compliant orientated. And I wonder if we've addressed the root cause of that. I wonder if you have any ideas on why that happens. In other words, we might try working with the leaders, but they're up against this culture, which is like a tsunami of pressure. Is it coming from donors, the old chestnut of donor-driven? Is it coming from fear of it going off track and going away from headquarters view or something? But the people I speak to in many NGOs are up against this culture where they're expected not to lead, but to be compliant officers at a high level. Now, can you help us understand why it happened and how can we address the root cause?
Okay, there seems to be a natural... No, we'll take one more, sir.
My name is Joy, and I work for the British Red Cross. My question to either Margie or Claire would be, would a leader be a leader in all the situations, or are there contexts where the leader has a space and that's why he's able to perform? And there could be a same person working in another context, but is not a leader. So how does that work?
Thanks. Okay, there's 6 questions. do we have a volunteer? Margie, would you like to pick up on the ones that you would like
Yeah.
to pick up on?
So much to pick up on. Let me try and be selective. First of all, Wendy's point about risk, the link between risk and innovation, I think absolutely key. And actually what I was struggling to look for, and I thought I'm not going to find it in 10 seconds, because there's a quote in the report from ALNAP's innovation study, which is also, which we quote in here, which is also about what brings about innovation. I mean, it's absolutely, it's completely, inherent to innovation, because you're trying something new, you're thinking outside the box. And I think that was the case in a number of our case studies, was actually a lot of the examples of leadership were associated with some kind of innovation. It's not terribly explicit in the report, but I can tell you that from having done the case studies, there was quite a lot of innovation in those examples.
Do you think more needs to be done to follow up on that?
I mean, I kind of feel that when more needs to be done is on the risk side, because I think we really need to understand better why so we've given some broad reasons why we think we've become risk averse, and I think we do need to explore that much more, because I think that's a key point of leverage in this whole area. It's a shift in culture, it's a shift in thinking, it's a shift in mindset. And maybe that takes me on to the question about space for leaders. Why is it constricting? I mean, I'm not sure whether we've got any donors in the room. I have a feeling we may not. But I think that the pressure is definitely coming from donors. I think the pressure that any of us who are receiving funding in any form in this sector are under increasing pressures to not only to predict with great accuracy what you're going to do in highly unpredictable environments, but then report in great detail what you actually did, and if it didn't match what you said it was going to do, despite the fact the context changed, it's really difficult. And I think it's a huge drain. I think the pendulum has swung far too far, and it's not just my view. This is what was coming back in a lot of the interviews from the leaders and the people working with the leaders. And but I think we've also brought it on ourselves a bit. So I don't think the finger can't just be pointed at the donors. So I think that as we've tried to professionalise, we've ended up proceduralising an awful lot. I think that's been quite constraining. And I mean, there's a lot more to say about that, but I don't think it's time to talk about it now. And I think as organisations have become more corporate, and I think this is particularly true of the NGO sector, large NGOs becoming very corporate, I think also that's there's a positive side and there's a negative side. The negative side to is again pushing down a kind of compliance route, and that space contracting. And so that's why I think, one of the questions I think Tim put to us is, so what happens next? Well, I think one of the things that has to happen next is that it's actually senior managers, it's chief executives of these organisations that I would really like to see really engaging with some of the challenges that this throws out about things like risk aversion, compliance cultures, giving people space, and how to do that in a responsible way. Then, I mean, there's leader that I think the question about is a leader in one context, can they be a leader in all contexts? And I think that, I mean, could expand a bit on this issue about can anybody from any sector be a humanitarian leader, but I think I'd rather hear from the floor on that first, maybe come back to that right at the end. But I think can a leader in one context be a leader in another context? We unfortunately didn't have a chance to look at our case study leaders in different contexts, except in a very superficial way. But I think what came out, but we did debate it quite a lot, and I think what came out was somebody who's a fantastic leader in one context, if they don't have the adaptability to really engage with and understand the context in a new situation, you absolutely can't assume that their leadership skills are going to be transferable. So the defining feature seems to be the ability of a leader to really engage with the context, and to take the time to engage with the context, and to value that, and then to adapt their leadership style accordingly.
Shall I go next?
Tim, please.
I think what I want to make, which I think relates to 3 or 4 of the questions, is that, and it sounds a bit as I'm teaching mother to suck eggs really, but everybody in this room is a leader. The question is, at what level are we operating at our leadership? Can we learn? Can we grow in our leadership, and so on? And I think the answer to that is yes. I don't think leaders are born, or not made. This debate that was referred to. I think all of us are leaders. We can learn and we can improve. What we're talking about here, though, are a special blend of leadership, which takes people into what's euphemistically called level 5 leadership. And those level 5 leaders have something about them, their gifts and the magic of them, which does enable them to operate in different environments. I've got no doubt about that at all. But I wouldn't want to get away from what Margaret's saying. You nonetheless do have to understand the context, so you don't just parachute somebody in from nowhere. But I thought Kate's point at the beginning was really, put the finger on the point here. What other case studies should be going on to look at business leadership, military leadership, and so forth, see the similarities, look at those case studies and be able to compare. And I think that would reinforce this point, that there are people who can move in and out of these various sectors and will add value to the debate and be able to deal with it. So I think there are people at this level who are, can move between these environments. My second point is to do with this space and the risk and so on. A guy I know well and he was one of my mentors, we were talking about the media one day, and he said to me, the media's like the weather, you've just got to put up with it. Some days it rains and some days it shines. This whole business about organizational structures and bureaucracy, I don't wish to be dismissive of it, but it is just a reality. If you put 50 people in a business, they will create a bureaucracy. And many of the people who live in that environment at the command level, telling people to go on and do, will be bureaucrats. They will be managers. They're not the sort of leaders we're talking about. The key to the good level 5 leader is just acknowledging it's like the blooming rain, or and dealing with it, and being prepared to make the decision that is a gamble, is a risk, actually, not a gamble. Come back to that later if necessary. But therefore, it's not about changing the system. I don't think the system is not going to change. It's about how do we create and develop leaders who understand that and are nonetheless prepared to be the people who make the decisions, take the risk, and crack on and deliver what needs to be delivered. I could say a bit more, but I think it's probably enough.
Well, actually, I agree with everything you said, but one thing.
Good.
Which is, everybody in this room is a leader. If everybody is a leader, then we dilute. Everybody is a human being in this room. Yep. We agree. But if everybody's a leader, we completely dilute the meaning of the term, I think. Okay. So I don't think everybody is a leader. Okay, well, I don't think we all are leaders. You probably are. DSRSGs. Why? I don't know which specific case you have in mind, but saying that the competencies are the same, and actually I don't say it, and the study says it. Look at the qualities that emerge. They are the same as for everybody else. Values. We are not the only people who have values in the world. There are lots of other people who have values. So in that case, saying that the competencies are the same doesn't imply that everybody has those competencies. So maybe that person you were thinking about didn't have the right competencies to be there. But the fact that there are people who have done that job successfully, is a proof that the job can be done if you have the right person in the right place. So that's a very, very short answer. Is it good to have other people, I don't remember who raised the question, to have people coming from other sectors? Of course, again, we are, why are we special? Why are we special? I can tell you in the UN these days, one of the best leaders, I think, is Susanna Malcorra, who is Under Secretary General for the Department of Field Support. She was an executive for Argentinian Telecom most of her life. Business. They don't have values in business, right? And then she was headhunted into WFP, and then she was parachuted. She got a job in the UN headquarters. She's doing brilliantly. So the UN is special. You need to have worked in the UN to be able to operate. The humanitarian sector is special. We are all special, huh? So absolutely, and that's what I will try to do, is to open, let fresh air come. You know, we all know that it's from different ideas, different ways of seeing things, different backgrounds, that richness and creativity emerges, not from being closed in the room with the same people you grew up with. So absolutely. On the content, whether the same leaders can be, I think I totally agree with what has been said already. You know, it's contextual, but there are some people who are able to transcend the context. Very few.
Goody, would you like to?
No, I just want to add to the risk. There are other two factors contributing to that. Actually, filling boxes and processes. The more you have filling boxes and processes, and the organization is not being able to take risk, these three factors will make the leaders in-looking. And when you are in-looking, then you will not be engaged, because the organization cannot provide the leadership to itself. You have to provide the leadership to others, and you have to be part of others. And that is what restricted. And this will relate to the issues of compliance, because the issue of compliance is coming also from external actors. We are dependent on the donors, and look, every single day you will find the donors are increasing their requirements. Yes, and then the other thing the leader also needs to strike a balance with by becoming a leader and a manager. You don't need to lose sight of your operation, because it could be a fatal mistake. And I have seen excellent leaders provided a lot of things, but because of not looking at the details, they have bent their fingers and their career end there, because also their organization is not able to take the risk beyond the acceptable limit. So innovation is important, but if we continue with these three factors, we are not taking risk. We are going with filling boxes, and we create more processes, and then you'll find people meeting each other. So I meet with just my people within the organization. I don't go out.
Yeah, please,
Sorry,
Claire.
I forgot to say one thing about risk taking. Galileo in Brecht's play says, "Pity the country that needs heroes." From looking at where I work, the UN, I say, yeah, pity the UN that needs hero. Why? What does that mean? It means that a system that is predicated on people having to behave like heroes just to do their job is a system that is unsustainable. And so we don't need heroes. We need to create an environment in which normal people making rational decisions will be able to get the job done. So we don't need heroes. We need to put everybody in an environment in which they can perform. And so in the UN context, that's particularly relevant. In the UN context, what does that mean concretely? It means thinking about risk management, where risk lies is, and how do we spread it? How do we manage risk? And the way the system is structured so far, at least in the UN, is that risk is concentrated in those people, the HCs, the SRGs, whatever, in the field. As a result, somebody has to be a hero to do to do his job. And so, if all the risk is concentrated on that person, the person carries an undue burden. And that's why you see so many of them being risk adverse. It's not because they don't care. It's not because they don't understand what the right thing to do. It's because why is it shameful to want to have a career? Why is it shameful to want to, You need to create, again, a set of incentives for rational people who care and who know what the right thing to do it. Otherwise, it's very easy to blame these guys for not taking the risky decisions, but we are shortchanging and we are actually failing them. And by failing them, we're failing ourselves.
Yes. Okay, I think it's time to turn to Malcolm and to just check, have we anybody that's still with us online?
I'm actually dealing with this, John. Yeah, we do. We've had a few questions come through. I'm going to start off with James Shepherd-Barron from UNICEF in Bangkok. He says, mentoring is a must, but it will always address the symptom unless the systematic failures of our risk-averse humanitarian world are addressed, specifically delegation of authority and responsibility by heads of organisations. Would the panel recommend mentoring to be mainstreamed in the search for professionalisation? And a connected question from Jenny at the University of York is, what are the implications of the findings of the ALNAP study for schemes that are run to help combat the absence of humanitarian leadership? And she mentions the CBHA funded humanitarian leadership development program, or are these all in kind of a too early stage to know what the implications are? We have a process question from Catherine Sexton, who's a independent consultant based in Leeds. She's interested to know from Margie the extent to which you looked into the specific culture of the humanitarian sector contrasted with the development sector, because she knows it's a contentious divide, but within organisations, the two different sectors have very different cultures. And finally, I guess more of a comment from Jamila Mahmood from the United Nations Population Fund. She says, the issue of leaders in international systems coming from the global south, including women, is a tiring rhetoric. If we are serious about this, should there not be an active process to identify, develop and grow this pool of candidates? I'm quite sure there's not a shortage of these types of leaders, but I'm frankly tired of hearing about it.
Joss, thank you very much. For those of you who don't know, I think Jamila Mahmood was one of the leaders who was interviewed by Margie as one of the case studies in the report. So there are 4 interesting questions and comments. Margie, maybe you want to respond, maybe certainly to the 4th one. I know that was part of your presentation.
Yeah. Okay, let me take maybe in the order in which they came up. Mentoring is a must. Should it be mainstreamed? I think this also and relates to organisational culture, and it relates to what Tim was saying. To some extent, of course, as a good leader, part of working with your context is working with whatever organisational culture is kind of thrown at you or you find yourself in. And our case study leaders, one of the ways in which they were so effective is because they did that. They kind of took what they had and they tried to work around it. But one of the things that definitely enabled them to do that was the fact that they often knew their cultures extremely well. And that comes back to this thing about experience. But anyway, that slightly takes me off track from the question. But I suppose where it does take me is, whilst we have to work with the cultures that we're given, I do think culture is changing in this sector. And I do think we need to be engaging with that and aware of how it's changing and actually being proactive rather than passively allowing it just to change. So should mentoring be mainstream? I think the challenge here is mentoring is happening all the time on an informal basis. And again, what was interesting with our case study leaders was how often they would talk about someone senior in their organisation or at a particular time in their career who had been a valuable role model and a mentor. And so there's something about, yes, let's see if we can capture the essence of that, but sometimes it may be allowing it to happen quite organically and fostering it rather than trying to, again, formalise it too much. But anyway, I do think that there is a much greater role for mentoring, particularly, I think if we're talking about creating greater opportunities for nationally recruited staff to move into international leadership positions, I think mentoring is key. The implications of the findings for programs like CBHA is very new, so I think it is too soon to say what impact are they having. But I think the fact that particularly an initiative like the CBHA is focusing very much on national staff is really to be welcomed. But I think it's just a real reminder that it's not just leadership development programs that are going to make the difference. I think that's where the challenge here is shifts in thinking, shifts in mindset, thinking about leadership as part of career development, not just as this kind of bolt-on. Did we look at the culture of the development sector? We did refer to some of the literature that's looked at leadership in the development and the NGO sector. But I'm not sure, I don't think I would feel confident enough that we could be really conclusive about distinctions there. But what I have found interesting is just in conversations with people in other sectors, public sector, even the private sector actually, mainly in this country because that's where I live. But talking about this compliance culture, how often it seems to resonate. I don't think it's just our sector that's suffering from it. I think it's an epidemic. And then Jamila's plea, I couldn't agree with her more. And I think it's the two. It's, you know, what can we do to foster national leadership and female leadership? But I think we need to understand a little bit more about what are the blockages that we didn't manage to do in this study. And it's not just this is not just a call for another study. It's a really, you know, it's if we keep on saying this, what is it that's getting in the way of us making a difference? And we need to be clear about that. And I'm sure, again, it's challenges in mindset. I mean, one of the things that did come through in the study is that assumptions are made about nationally recruited staff and their levels of expertise and perhaps their lack of exposure. Assumptions are made about how that holds them, how that means that they are not fit for international positions. And some of them I heard in interviews for this study, and some of them are quite shocking. And I think we need to challenge ourselves in some of these assumptions.
Would any of you like to add to that, or shall I move on to other questions? But please do if you want to.
Maybe I'll add on the mentoring. I fully agree. I mean, we're going to start. We're going to start a mentoring. We have started just now a mentoring program for humanitarian coordinators. So let's see how that works, but I think it's absolutely very important. And then grooming leaders from the south, of course. I think the main obstacle is lack of political will. I mean, lack of will. It's not rocket science. We just need to do it. And I was just talking with colleagues yesterday and today about how we will probably get it started for as ISC to try to do grooming together with all the partners of potential leaders. We just need to do it. Not rocket science.
Please. I mean, I agree with that. I think the point I think I want to make in the context of those points is that other organisations, and the military, obviously I speak from that perspective, have also taken a long time to get their minds around this. But we now absolutely recognise that this is not a one-off business. This is about how do you take young people and grow and develop them throughout their careers in the whole business of leadership. So we now have in the British military a junior staff course, which includes junior command and staff course. We have a sort of intermediate level command and staff course. We have a higher command and staff course. We have the Royal College of Defence Studies at all levels, moving people up and so on. Now, how does that work in an international community like the humanitarian community? Well, it works through organisations like the United Nations and places, I hadn't heard of the CBHA, but places like that. And I just sort of sense in all this, somehow again, how do we get ECHO or DFID or UN to agree that you need that structure that people from the global south can then come and do something for a period of time, go away and come back again later on and keep on moving up the system to grow in leadership. Now, I still would argue, and we don't want to start an open, a sort of argument here, but everybody is a leader. I'm not saying they're good or bad leaders. And you put people through the system and they get to a level where you realise, you know what, that's it. You're only going to be a level 2 or a level 3 leader. And what this conversation is about is how do you prepare the level 5 leaders who are, I call, morally courageous leaders. That's what we're talking about. People who will make decisions under pressure in difficult circumstances, and even though the Prime Minister or the donor community is on their back, or whoever it is on their back, because modern communications allow them to reach down so much, is able to say, do you know what? I don't care. This is the right thing to do. This is what we're going to do. They are a unique brand of people, and they're the ones that you only develop over time through some sort of system. So the Global South piece is part of that, and the mentoring is part of that. The implications leadership development programs hopefully would be, a success at the end of it all. But it won't happen overnight. But it does take some sort of drive from somewhere. I don't know where it will come from, but I'd like to think DFID, ECHO, UN, maybe could get together on that.
Brilliant. Let's try and squeeze in 2 or 3 more questions from the floor. David, please.
Thanks. I'm David Alexander. I nowadays work for myself. I used to work for British Red Cross and Save the Children. I'm not sure whether this is going to come out as a question or a comment or a sort of rambling reflection, but I'm really challenged by this whole compliance corporate thing. And I wanted to pick up something that Tim said a bit earlier, and I'm not sure whether I fully understood. And there's a bit of it I agree with, and I think there's a bit of it I don't agree with. Sure. Some of us, I don't know why I'm looking at you, John, some of us are old enough to remember a rather different culture in the humanitarian sector when we started in it, with far greater emphasis on the informal, and I think a lot of what you're talking about, Margie, is the informal and much less on the formal. We got a lot of things wrong. I'm sure we did lots of things we shouldn't have done. We probably didn't do lots of things we should have done. But the fact was, the culture then was that as a country director or field director, as we rather quaintly called it in those days, your judgment was trusted. You were given space, but it wasn't totally unlicensed space. You actually have to create space as well, and if you create space responsibly, you tended to be given more space. And the thing you knew more than anything was that provided you kept your head office informed of what you were doing, they would back you to the hilt. There was no career limiting in that. And NGOs have changed a lot in the last 25 years or so. What worries me is where they're going. And my absolute warning is another organisation that I know quite a lot about, which is the NHS, where compliance has, and there is an organisation that is politically run, and the worry about our sector is that we have become so politically compromised that in many cases we are almost politically run. Now, when you're politically run and your money comes from politicians who are terrified of the media, it matters not, in a sense, whether you're an NGO or you're a government department. What I see in my dealings with the NHS is a managerial culture of fear. People are in senior positions who have got there by managerial compliance and ticking boxes, and they cannot lead. There are exceptions, but a lot of them cannot lead. They know they're out of their depth. They're frightened. They don't dare give anybody any space down the line, and it's a disaster. If that happened in our sector to our organisations, that would be an absolute tragedy. And so where I agree with you, Tim, is when you say, don't let it paralyse you. It's like the weather, just get on with it. Because I think that's saying you can create the space. You don't have to be completely hobbled by this. What I don't agree with is just because it's like the weather, say, well, we have to put up with it. We cannot put up with it if we don't challenge it and challenge it upwards and actually help the people at the top who very often cannot do this themselves because they can't see the problem, because they're victims of that culture. Then actually we're going to lose a lot of the things that I joined this sector for.
Take that. We've got two more questions. Gentleman here. Sorry, I can't remember your name. But anyway, you're going to tell us, so it doesn't matter really, does it?
Good afternoon. My name's Richard Luff. I'm an independent. A couple of you have talked about the importance of context analysis. So if I can describe it the way I would see it, the importance of context analysis is so that when your level 5 leader arrives, they get to grips with the context so that they're oriented in the right way. But how does one go about teaching, enabling people to understand how to go about context analysis?
Thanks, Richard. And finally, Sarah, please.
Thank you. I'm Sara Pantriano. I'm the head of the Humanitarian Policy Group here at ODI. And as Margie has mentioned, even though I did say not two, one of the case study leaders, I just wanted to add a comment on this whole issue of the compliance and bureaucratization that Margie talked about. And in general, what I see as, this heavy emphasis on processes in most of the organizations we work with. And that is based on my personal experience, but also I think comes out of the study in some ways. And is the fact that, many leaders, to be able to operate as leaders, leaders will always try and comply with as many processes as they can, you know, to keep the organization happy at a certain level, to prevent the organization from pushing them out or stopping them, you know, what they're doing, while trying to take risks and be inventive and creative and create a team and, you know, do what they feel genuinely is important to do. And I think that's where the burnout comes of, and that is really, for me, critically important, is where, you know, your work-life balance goes. Because if you're trying to be effective, you're trying to balance both things. You're trying to continue to fit with the organization to some extent, you know, that you can still operate. But at the same time, you're trying to do the right stuff. And you don't have time for both. So you have to work 2 jobs at the same time. And I'd be interested in your comments on that. Thanks.
Who would like to respond to any of those questions?
The other direction and move back.
We can start with Al-Qadir, please.
Sorry.
No, I'm not going to respond to each one, but I am going to go into key points which I feel it is very important. For me, you have to play the comparative advantage in the humanitarian sector. If you want the humanitarian sector to give it optimum to the people we want to work with. And that comparative advantage rests with the key actors, NGOs, donors, and UN agencies. And one of the things I found it quite frustrating sometimes in the issues of leadership and taking the whole issue of having a leader level 5 is not about running a program. It's about taking decisions that affect life of thousands of people on the spot, or an issue that could lead to the manipulation of the humanitarian sector that's serving a warlord or a group rather than the benefit go to the community. So there are many, many things. And my caution for us as an NGOs, that I believe that this space, respecting diversity, practicing it, not trying to talk about it in the policies, and bring the added value of different skills and different talents from different geographical areas within the organization is very important. And it's not a matter of backing the if you want to get a buy-in of 5 departments in your head office, that will take you 1 week, that will take you 2 weeks, that will take you 3 weeks. What does that mean? It means you are delaying, you are holding the whole community ransom for your head office bureaucracy. And that space has to be given for that. When it comes to the UN, and I hope that you are taking that, I really very impressed with the colleagues in the UN that are highly talented people. But you go to a UN organization and you find SAYA, boss. I call it I call it a military barracks in a third world country. It's just you can't, because you sit around the table and you have to say, yes, what is a good idea? And it is rubbish. And the guy, he knows it is rubbish and he wants to say it, but he can't say it because he knew that. How you nourish a leader when you are not allowing that space? You cannot. Then donors, some donors, they recruit people with all due respect. Yes, you are coming from the wealthy country and so on, but it doesn't mean that you understand the context. It doesn't mean that you do the prescription of the context. So you need to learn as well as anyone would like to learn. And some donors, they would like you to come and say, yes, sir, what is a good idea? And I have to take one donor to a lunch. I said to him, look, I left my country for one reason. Because the government created so many rubber stamps, parliament rubber stamps, civil service rubber stamps, and I left that and I came to Save the Children because I felt that Save the Children is giving me an opportunity to serve the passion and the cause I would like to work for. If you are today, you are telling me that I want a yes, sir, then if it's another rubber stamp, then it better I go to my government and I just clamp to them and stay there. Then all the essence of the accountability and good governance you are promoting, if you are not practicing here, you are not giving me any role model. Do you want me to be a prime minister in my country and follow your example? I think the three sectors, the three actors, I will say, the donors, the UN, the NGOs, they have to think we need to bring the comparative advantage. And if we brought that comparative advantage, we create a conducive environment which can nourish leadership and where people will bring their talents from different parts of the world. Not money count, not because you are coming from the UK, you dictate because you are contributing 0.7% of the GDP and therefore you are the major player in the donor. No, there are other people understand the context very well, and I know, let me give you an example. I know a donor, I know the NGO, I know United Nations working in the area, and the people there, actually they are coordinating with the warlord, and all the resources is being channeled through the warlords. Because there's no space, there's no challenging environment, and that is happening. The whole human complexity, you need to understand that all these resources of the taxpayers and all what we say that Paris Declaration for aid effectiveness and all that is run out because the space for leadership is limited. And I feel that it is really, we have discussed this on leadership for some time, but we need to move it in practice. And it is very hard and it is very painful that we need to be humble, we need to drop our egos, we need to be equal, we need to respect diversity, we need to understand that our talent is limited, whether you are from Oxford or a university in Uganda. It is that level which requires the sector to move forward.
Thank you.
One word on the context analysis. I don't think teaching how to analyze a context, political context or socio-economic is particularly difficult. I think universities are notoriously good at that, and I don't think that the other part, teaching people how to draft a strategy or a plan of action, that too is very difficult. That can be done. I think what's difficult is linking the two. That is. A critical quality that we look in, at least in humanitarian coordinators, is the ability to position humanitarian assistance in a political and socio-economic context, to understand whether humanitarian assistance is actually fueling the war economy, where it is doing more harm than good, whether it's being manipulated by one donor, the government, one party, etc. And so it's linking the understanding of the context with the practical plan that you're going to implement, and not just going blindly and developing a plan that is going to in the end do more harm than good. So that part is difficult, the linking of the two.
Yeah, I think I want to pick up the same point. I think the conceptual piece, I mentioned earlier on, I thought there were three parts to this: the physical component, the conceptual component, which I think is what we're talking about in this context, and linking them together. I mentioned this thing called the Higher Command and Staff course, which we introduced relatively recently, as in 15 years or so ago. And that is a campaign planning course which does look at how do you analyse, what tools are there available, what process is available to enable you to do the analysis of the conceptual piece and the context and so on. And I think the reason that this conversation this afternoon is so important in this operational space is because it is at the operational level that all of this is pulled together and delivered. So going back to the earlier question too, I think I don't want to be dismissive about it, and I don't disagree with what you just said. I don't think we're not disagreeing in one sense, but that pressure I don't think is going to go away. I mean, the aid business is big business now. The decision by the UK government to give DFID 0.7%, there's been a lot of media comment about that, a lot of people asking the questions. They're going to want to know, and one could say as a taxpayer rightly, that this is well spent money, it's effective, it's efficient and so on. So the transparency, the pressure to be effective and efficient, all of that will be around, and that will carry with it an inevitable chunk of bureaucracy. I'm not saying we collectively shouldn't fight to make that more manageable, resist it where we can, argue against it and so on, but it is going to be there. And the reason I say this operational level is so important is because that's where the accountability ultimately will fall. I mean, when we talk about campaign planning or the operational level, we're talking about Haiti or where the tsunami hits or the earthquake in Pakistan or whatever. It's that level that all this comes together. So I just think it is inevitable. There are going to be people who want to tick boxes and find out where the money went and put those pressures on. And yes, it will generate a fear. It's actually interesting today, the Archbishop of Canterbury has talked about this fear culture. and the old targeting regime in the NHS and all the rest of it. But that has been pushed back a bit, I think, to be fair. So we can resist it. But you know, it's why this level is so important. I'm repeating myself slightly, and where I think this campaign planning business, which has an element of science about it, has a large chunk of art about it, but putting people in a position where they can learn and prepare, so when they go to be a regional coordinator or they go to command one of these operations, they have in their toolbox some understanding of how you set about doing it, and that's there. It's not difficult. I mean, it can be put in place. It's just political willingness to put it in place. Sorry, I'm banging on.
No, not at all. Thank you. Margie, final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll try and be as brief as I can. I think one of our challenges, just to pick up on where Tim left off and David's point, is I think one of our challenges is to provide evidence that we can do some really good work, some of the best work, when it's not squeezed into this kind of compliance culture. I think it's showing that there is a different way of doing things that actually can be very effective. So I just wanted to start off with that. Zara's point about burnout, partly because of trying to deal with the compliance culture and do a good job. I'm just reminded of one of the interviewees who said, you know, I used to spend 90% of my time out with the affected population. Now that's cut down to absolute maximum 50% because I'm in contact with my head office all the time. So, you know, you hear that a lot. And the final thing I want to say is to come back to, I really want to emphasize what came through in our case studies about the value of experience. And it's not just years of experience, it's reflecting and learning from your experience in leadership. And I may have a slightly different take on this from Claire, because I actually think to really do good contextual analysis, you can't learn it in universities and in classrooms. That you get from experience, and particularly the political analysis. And there are exceptions, of course, of people who can move into operational leadership positions who may have limited experience of this sector. But there were examples in the case studies of people saying, this is where the lack of experience showed up. This was an issue. And the experience of our case study leaders was really valued. So I'm just reporting back on the evidence from our case studies. Let's not devalue experience. It came out as very, very, very much valued. And let me finish there.
Thank you. Just before we wind up, I'd just like to do two things. Right at the beginning, we had the question about whether there is such a thing as humanitarian leadership, or whether it's leadership in a humanitarian context. And I wondered if we could, after listening to this discussion, just take a quick straw poll to see what we think now. So all of you that think there is no such thing as humanitarian leadership and it's just leadership in a humanitarian context, please raise your hands. Okay, so that's about half. And if you think there is a thing called humanitarian leadership, which is a distinctive thing, raise your hands.
Leadership with little or no authority.
Yeah.
That's less than half, isn't it?
It's half and half, isn't it? Well. Not scientific, not art either, I don't think. I'm not sure what it was, but anyway. And very finally, I just wanted to pick up on Tim's point. What happens next? I'd just like to ask the panelists really quickly, in one sentence, if there's one thing we need to do as a system, as ALNAP, what is it? Just one. So can I start with you?
Okay.
Just off the top of your head, and I'll write them down.
One
and we'll see
thing.
if it's our action plan.
I think we need to be having this debate and this dialogue at the highest level right across the board, with donors, with senior people in UN organisations, with chief executives of NGOs, with chief executives of Red Cross and Red Crescent organisations.
Brilliant. Tim?
I agree with that, and I mentioned earlier on ELRA, Humanitarian Futures Programme, and this programme together, I think saying to those senior people, we want a conversation, maybe will provide the elbow room to do.
Claire?
Let's move on from just focusing on leaders as individuals and think, not only think and act as collective leaders.
Brilliant.
Act.
Okay.
I will say practice it, and knowing that we cannot change the world on our own, the other actors need to move extra miles towards us also.
Brilliant. And just to finally say that Josh will be putting an online debate forum, so maybe we can pick up these last 4 action points on that to start the discussion going. Just to say to everyone, thank you very, very much for coming. I hope you found this interesting. I know I certainly have, and I'd really like to thank Margie for her presentation, particularly the 3 panellists who have given us a great deal of insight and wisdom. Thank you very much. And I do believe there are refreshments next door, am I correct? Yes? No.
No leadership there.
No leadership there.